Without any further delay, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Anthony McCluskey tonight. Now, Anthony is one of the conservation managers at Butterfly Conservation for Scotland. Anthony has he's really served pollinators in Scotland for well over the last 10 years. When I first met Anthony, he worked for bumblebee conservation and did some amazing work looking after our bees and bumblebees through it, and then came on to butterfly conservation and worked on the urban butterfly and various of the other sort of gardening and helping butterflies and what we can do and how we can enhance our green spaces before now becoming a conservation manager, where he's going to tell us about a lot of some of Scotland's rarest species and what's going on with them and what people can do. So thank you very much for coming along, Anthony, and over to you.
Thanks a lot, Stuart. And can you confirm you can just see my screen properly and all the rest there before you go off?
Yeah, I can see it all okay.
Perfect. Okay, let's get started. So, well, thanks very much, Stuart, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak tonight. And as Stuart mentioned, I'm one of the conservation managers for butterfly conservation in Scotland. And tonight we're going to look at the butterflies and moths that really most need our help for conservation work. Before I start, I want to thank NatureScot, who fund most of our work in Scotland. And just to introduce butterfly conservation, so we're a UK-wide charity. We were founded in 1968 with a mission to conserve butterflies, moths, and our environment. We undertake that work in a number of important ways. So we take practical conservation action. We promote the scientific study of butterflies and moths. We safeguard the most important sites. And as Stuart mentioned, a large part of my role over the past 10 years or so at various organizations has been around the public enjoyment of butterflies and moths so people can really get to know them. So butterfly conservation, we've got 40,000 members. We've got thousands of volunteers, and they really are the backbone and the lifeblood of the organization. But we're extremely lucky to be supported by Sir David Attenborough, who is our president. And just a wee intro to butterflies and moths. So they belong to a group of insects called the Lepidoptera. This means scaly wings. And if you look at the photograph here, this is a peacock butterfly, a common springtime butterfly, but you've probably never seen it like this. If you look at any butterfly or moth, you'll see that their wings are covered in these scales, these colored scales, which come together to make up the patterns on their wings, which gives them the name Lepidoptera. And indeed, if you get one of these in your home, you'll see the kind of dust that comes off them. Those are the scales coming from their wings. There's 180,000 species worldwide, and in the UK, we have 59 species of butterfly, which are resident or regular migrants to here. We have 35 of these regularly breeding in Scotland, but really they're vastly outnumbered by the moths. There's over 2,500 species of moth in the UK, and I don't mean to shatter anybody's dreams tonight if you really don't like moths or anything, but butterflies are basically moths. Genetic studies have shown them to be right in the middle of the moth family tree, so you can't love butterflies without loving moths. And I'll hopefully show you some interesting ones tonight, so you'll fall in love with moths as much as I do and as much as Stuart does. So insect populations in the UK aren't doing so well. You might have heard insect apocalypse and such like. We've got stronger evidence. So our latest report came out in 2022, and it found that 80% of our butterfly species here have declined in the range or their abundance in the past 50 years. The ones which are doing worst are the habitat specialists. These are species which require just a narrow range of caterpillar food plants or particular particular habitats like flower-rich grassland. So they're really, really struggling. Whereas some of them, which we call wider countryside species, those are ones which can lay their eggs upon common grasses, for example. They're doing better and actually are responding to climate change and increasing in many areas. And we know this because we have teams of volunteers collecting the data. We have over 14 million records of butterflies and over 2,500 annually monitored sites. Those are places where people go year on year to count the butterflies and report the numbers back to us. And as I mentioned, some species are increasing, possibly because of climate change. A case is the orange. It's dramatically increased its range in Scotland, as you can see in the lighter orange dots on the map there. And numbers of orange tip have doubled in Scotland in the last 10 years alone. And if you live in the east of Scotland, you may already have seen species you've never seen before in just the last year or two. Species like the wall brown, holly blue, or small skipper are basically romping up the east coast. So we can see what effect climate change is happening. Obviously, climate change is a kind of ecological disaster, but we have to do our best to help the species move and respond to that climate change. But just to say then that some species aren't doing so well, so things like the common blue, which used to be almost everywhere, we've lost 38% of sites for that species in Scotland in the past 50 years. You'll see on the map some blue circles with clear centres. Those are places where the common blue used to be found, but isn't found anymore. Its caterpillars feed upon common bird's foot trefoils, so there's no reason why this butterfly shouldn't be almost everywhere. But as we'll see, some of the pressures on butterflies and moths are meaning that sites are just disappearing at a great rate. And of course, I couldn't forget about moths. So our latest report came out in 2021. And as I mentioned, there's 2,500 moth species. For this analysis, they only looked at 900 or so of the larger moths, and they found that macro moth numbers, that's the larger moths, have reduced by 30% across Britain since the 1970s. That's just their numbers. That's just the sheer abundance, which if you think about birds or bats which eat insects, you can think about that as being every third mouthful disappearing if they're only eating moths. So it really will have impacts on the wider environment. But as I mentioned with climate change and butterflies, moths are being affected too. So this picture here shows the narrow bordered five-spot burnout moth. It's a real mouthful, but it's a beautiful moth. Looks very similar to the six-spot burnout moth, which you might be more familiar with. But this is a species which has recently began to increase its range and become much more common in Scotland, again because of climate change. We know that a northern distribution of moths is increasing by 5 kilometers a year, and the ones doing best are the woodland and grassland species. And again, we know this because we have people counting them, people running moth traps, people counting moths when they're out and about doing their transects and things. So yeah, we have a lot of data showing what's happening to moths as well. So thank you very much if you're part of the team, if you're part of the kind of army of volunteers collecting those things. I'm not going to dwell too much upon the reasons behind the declines because they are many and varied, but a lot of the blame can be put upon agricultural intensification. So that includes pesticides, herbicides, changes to land use, and basically the photograph on the right is an example of what I call the green desert. You can go through the countryside in many places and just see mile after monocrop, just monotonous greenness, or land which just is no good for wildlife at all. And this is why many other insects, as well as birds and mammals, are in decline too. Woodland management has changed as well, and many species are suffering simply because in the past, woodlands had a lot more edge habitat in them. They had kind of coppiced maintenance, where people would go in, take part of the woodland out, but it would regrow naturally over a few years. That allowed a lot of ground wildflowers to suddenly spurt up, and the butterflies thrived upon those. But in many places now, woodlands have become very dark and dense. Other types of habitat loss have included 40% of ancient broadleaf woodlands. We've lost 200,000 miles of hedgerow since the Second World War. We lost virtually all of our elm disease because of a disease called Dutch elm, and now we're losing our ash trees as well to ash dieback. That will affect the species of moth which can only feed upon ash trees as their caterpillars, so we're looking into the impacts of that. Top it all off, we've lost around 98% of our lowland flower-rich meadows, and we're also doing more research on climate change and light pollution and things like urban habitat loss. You can think of it as being death by 1,000 cuts for many species. It's just too much stuff happening all at once in such a quick time. And really, it's a hard place out there now for butterflies and moths, but we're doing our best to turn it around. Now, if you're already a member of the Scottish Wildlife Trust, I assume that you enjoy wildlife and you can value it for its intrinsic value. And who wouldn't love a species like this pearl border fritillary? They're wonderful things to watch and would be kind of all the poorer, much poorer in society if we didn't have things like this. We've also got a great educational value. We can talk to children and young people about the value of butterflies and moths, but also link that to the wider environment. And they're extremely important for food webs, which I kind of touched on before. But one stark thing to remember is that a nest of blue tits, for example. Each chick in the nest can eat 100 food items per day. These food items are primarily going to be caterpillars and grubs of insects, mostly caterpillars which live in trees. So each of those eating 100 per day. If there's 10 chicks in the nest, that's 1,000 food items per day. If it takes them 30 days to fledge, that can be 30,000 food items for one nest of blue tits. So just kind of let that sink in. They need an awful lot of food. And so if we didn't have these insects, we're definitely not going to be able to support bird populations as well. But we know that's good for our mental health and well-being, and getting out on a sunny day to look for insects, especially with doing it with other people, is just great fun. And it's really good for our mental and physical well-being. And I'm not sure if Roy Sexton's here tonight, but I know he did a lot of the research on this, and I think Stuart was involved in it actually. This is one of the butterfly orchids. You'll notice that they have a really long nectar spur at the back of the flower. This is where the nectar is contained at the very bottom of it. Roy and others found that basically these butterfly orchids can only be pollinated by certain species of moth with a very long tongue, which fly just at the right time of year and are attracted to these flowers. So the moths are the only insects which can do this pollination reliably. If we didn't have them, then again, things like butterfly orchids would decline. We also know that they pollinate common wildflowers and crops as well. So we're doing a lot more research onto the kind of night shift of pollinators, because everyone thinks it's all about the bees, but actually we know that moths are doing a huge amount of pollination at night of our crops. And so at Butterfly Conservation, we've got a long track record of kind of helping species and changing public behavior. We work with farmers and local authorities to work on a landscape scale outside of the nature reserves that we manage. We do things like habitat restoration by, this is an example of on peat bogs. We're restoring those peat bogs by putting these dams into them to help them get re-wetted. We provide advice on large infrastructure projects. This is my colleague Phil Stirling. He's working in the south coast of England, and here he helped them to make a fantastic road verge, which is now one of the best sites for butterflies in the south of England. There are huge numbers there just because they got the planting right during the design stage. We get involved in protecting important sites like Cool Links in the north of Scotland, which is once again threatened with the prospect of a golf course development on it. So we get involved in issues like that. And occasionally we reintroduce species. This is the dark bordered beauty moth, and we're working with others to reintroduce it to another site in the Highlands, because it's only present at one site at the moment. So we're really helping it to basically double its range by introducing it to other sites. And then in urban areas, some of my previous work included things like gardening advice for homes and councils, creating new wild spaces, these meadows in towns and cities. We do a lot of public engagement work. We do education work through bunching caterpillars, and we also support the volunteers to monitor species as well. So you can see we're working on many different fronts, and it can be difficult sometimes to prioritize. So that's exactly what we're doing through our strategy. There's a new UK-wide strategy for butterfly conservation, but in Scotland we've divided it down even further. So on our strategy, we have priority species. 5 of these are butterflies. 13 of them are macro moths, and there are 9 micro moth species. So I'll talk about a selection of these tonight and hopefully get you enthused about the wonderful world of butterflies and moths and how you can help how you can help them. But we're not working. We would do our best to work across all over Scotland, but we really focused upon 19 different landscapes. These range from the most southerly is the North Solway coast. You can see it listed there. We've got Northern Brown Argus living down there. Goes right through the borders and up the east coast to different landscapes along there, and right up to the Caithness coast where the small blue butterfly lives. And then out in the west coast, we also have a smattering of landscapes as well. So you can see we're working in many different places. We're focusing our work there, but we can also help people who are living in not within the priority landscapes to get involved with our work too. So I've been invited tonight to talk to you by the Stirling and Clakmannanshire Group of Scottish Wildlife Trusts. So I just want to highlight 2 of the main landscapes, first of all, that are in that area. That includes our central Scotland peatlands and the Loch Katrine landscapes. And I'll talk a wee bit about the species in those first, before going on a bit of a tour of Scotland and showing you what else is out there. So how can we help the species? Just to say, we don't know everything about them already, so they can be helped in different ways. For some of them, we're still at the stage of trying to work out what their caterpillars feed upon. For other ones, we're conducting special surveys and trying to find out how their numbers are doing and hopefully discovering new sites for them. And we'll undertake and test management. So some of that might be by working with farmers, other times is working with volunteers and groups to maintain the habitat. And almost all of these need help from volunteers, so I'll show you different ways you can get involved. So first of all, we'll start with the northern brown Argus butterfly. This is a lovely little butterfly. Stuart introduced it at the start, and one of the things that's interesting about it is that it's actually in the same family of butterflies as the common blue and the Hare Street butterflies that you might know of. Most of the UK population for the northern brown Argus is found in Scotland, and there is a species in the south called the brown Argus butterfly, whose caterpillars feed upon a different plant. This is the northern brown Argus, which was actually first discovered in the world in Holyrood Park in Edinburgh. So it's still there, and we're doing our best to help it maintain its kind of stronghold there. Now, if you want to recognise the northern brown Argus in Scotland, all the Scottish forms of it have those two little white dots that you'll see on the wings there, and that indicates to you that it's the northern brown Argus butterfly. So this species lives in flower-rich grasslands with very short vegetation, and the caterpillars feed upon a plant called common rock rose. You'll see the distinctive flowers of common rock rose, but you'll also notice that it doesn't grow very tall at all. This is a photograph I took at the Scottish Wildlife Trust Reserve at Tummel River Shingle near Ballinluig. It's one of the best sites I've ever seen for northern brown Argus. There were dozens of them there. Their eggs were all over the place. It was amazing. So that's a fantastic site. And I'm actually doing an event there later this year. So you'll hopefully see that and come along to that. But the thing about common rock rose is that because it can't grow very tall, it can easily suffer from undergrazing. So if you take the stalk off some land, or if gorse grows over it, it can just disappear very quickly. And that's what happened at the Yokels, where this species used to be very common, but over the 19th and 20th centuries, it virtually disappeared from the entire Ochils because it was overgrazed, because there was just too many sheep on the land. And more recently, then, is suffering from upland tree planting again because sometimes trees literally go on the habitat. But even when that isn't the case, the deer fencing that's needed for the tree planting can exclude grazers, even wild grazers like sheep, which then means that the wildflower soon disappears. Or wild grazers like deer, not sheep. And just to show you, this is where the butterfly is found in Scotland. So you can see it's right from the kind of Solway coast and Dumfries and Galloway and Ayrshire, but most of the populations are in the east of the country. I should say then that these dots, I've just made them big so you can see where they are, but realistically, the butterfly is only inhabiting tiny parts of each of these dots, and some of the colonies are very isolated. So I will send information around after today, and this talk will be recorded so you can look at it again. But if you want, you can maybe note the species as I go through that are in your area, and then afterwards you can contact me and let me know what you would like to be involved in. But for this species, yes, we're doing a lot of work on recording it and monitoring it. But as Stuart alluded to at the beginning of the talk, there's been some excitement in Stirlingshire. So a few years ago, one of our volunteers named Ida, she moved into a house in Blair Logie, which if you know the geography of Stirling, you'll know that it's literally just across the border from Clakmannanshire. So it's just inside the border. So she planted rock rose in her garden, knowing that Northern Brown Argus was found about 5 miles away in Alva Glen, and just doing it on a kind of wing and a prayer. And within the first year, I think it was first or second year, she found Northern Brown Argus's breeding in her garden, which was kind of sent shockwaves through the conservation world because we couldn't believe it. So Ida then was very diligent. She went onto the hill above Blair Logie and under Dumayet, and she found patches of rock rose. And last year, a team, I went up the hill with a team, and we found a crag that had lots of rock rose on it, and we found a Northern Brown Argus there. We found, and this is possibly one of the first Northern Brown Arguses to be seen in Stirlingshire for over 100 years. So I thought you'd like to see the photo with the little Northern Brown Argus, but some beautiful Stirling landmarks in the background there. So as Stuart mentioned, we're doing work with Future Forest Company and Edinburgh University, who own parts of the site now, to plant more plants for it and to look after the habitat. So that's one amazing story that I'm really proud to be part of. So how can you help? You can get involved in monitoring species. So if you know it's in your area, I can tell you if it's in your area. You can get involved through like weekly counts for the species. If you're out and about and you see a wee dark brown butterfly with white spots on its upper wings, get a photo, note the location, and send the photo to us, because it could be a completely new site for the species. We have found some new sites just within the past few years. And as I mentioned, we're maintaining habitat. So we're doing active work in the Ochils, Edinburgh, Solway Coast, Perthshire, and Murray and Angus coasts to maintain habitat for the species. So if that sounds of interest to you, let me know and we'll get you sorted. Now, pearl border fritillary, this is my gateway butterfly. This is the butterfly that really got me into them, because I was volunteering with National Trust for Scotland up at Ben Lowers, and we spent 3 days looking for this butterfly, running across bracken-covered hills in hot conditions, looking for the species. And then when we caught it, it was amazing. So pearl border fritillary has a special place in my heart, and you can see why. It's gorgeous. It's lovely. So the caterpillars of this species then mostly feed upon common dog's violet in Scotland, and the adults will take nectar from things like bugle, primrose, and dandelion. And they come out usually in late May and early June. But across the UK, this butterfly is going down the tubes. So around 90% of sites for this species have been lost in the UK since the 1970s. In Scotland, they're still doing relatively well, but we know that we really need to keep an eye on it and look after those sites. So in Scotland, it's mostly found in bracken-covered hillsides. And why bracken? Bracken's almost useless, really, as a plant for feeding. You know, not much can eat it. It's a very poisonous plant. The caterpillars of this plant don't eat it, but what they do use it for is to heat themselves up. So I challenge you, find a patch of dead bracken in say late March, April, or May, and go and put your hand on it on a sunny day. Then put the same hand on a patch of grass nearby. The difference can be about 20 degrees Celsius. Dead bracken just gets really, really warm on a sunny day. So the caterpillars of this species will eat the violets, then they'll crawl onto the bracken, heat their bodies up, and that helps them to digest their food. And this is why then in Scotland they really need the bracken nearby, because it creates that microclimate that they need. Whereas in parts of England, they don't need that because it's a bit warmer down there. So bracken-covered hillsides with violets are what it needs. And this is the distribution here. So if you're in the far south, way down Dumfries and Galloway, you'll find it in maybe Forest and places like that. But really, you're not finding the species again until you get to kind of the southern parts of the Highlands, and then the species really takes off again. And I should say that some sites have been lost to things like farming and forest management, but also climate change, because in parts of the south, grass and vegetation are now growing basically all year round and swamping out the violets, whereas in Scotland, we haven't really got to that stage just yet. As we alluded to at the start as well, there's been some new discoveries in the Trossachs. So just a few years ago in 2018, after many, many years of searching, there have been computer modeling showing that the pearl border fritillary should be there because of the habitat and such like. After many years of searches, a team led by Nick Cook and others from the Butterfly Conservation Branch rediscovered this butterfly in the Trossachs area, and it's again sent shockwaves through the conservation world. This extremely rare butterfly turning up at a new site, and now we are getting volunteers involved by monitoring the species, by undertaking weekly counts, by conducting more searches in the Trossachs, because we have a feeling that its distribution is wider and we just need to get people on the ground at the right time of year. And we're also doing habitat work, so things like breaking up the bracken. So this is at Loch Catrin, and we got volunteers. We came out in November and we raked the dead bracken away, but left some of it. So you'll see the dark patches are where we raked it away. That's because the bracken there was so thick that the violets couldn't get through. So we're hoping that by raking that away, it will spring up with new violets and wildflowers that the butterflies can feed upon, but there's enough bracken around to still make that microclimate effect. So it's quite experimental, and we'll see how that goes. Now, Large heath. So you might have heard of the small heath, it might be quite familiar to you. It's quite a nice little grassland species. Large heath has a deceptive name because it isn't that much larger than the small heath. One of the differences though is that it tends to be spottier. So if you look at the undersides of the wings here, you can see lots of black spots there. The small heath will only have one black eye spot on the lower side of the forewing, whereas the large heath has a lot more spots on it. Generally, that's one way to tell them apart. However, you can't take that for granted because in parts of the north of Scotland, you find a form called a Scotica, and the Scotica form, as you can see, has almost no spots on the undersides of the wings, so it can be a bit tricky up there. But then if you go south into southern Scotland and England and Wales, you'll find a form with even bigger spots. So you can see that this is the same species, but looks different throughout its range. There's different theories about why that's the case, but I'll not go into those tonight. In Scotland, you're going to find the large heath on peat bogs, both lowland and upland, and the caterpillars feed upon a plant called hare's tail cottongrass. You might know it as bog cottongrass, and you can see the kind of the seed heads swaying in the wind there over the bog. So if you've got that plant around, there's a very good chance that you're going to have large heath. But again, not many people are out walking in the middle of bogs, so this species probably goes under-recorded. A great fact about large heath is that actually the caterpillars can survive inundation. They can live underwater for a while because of their boggy habitat. They can just cope with being inundated, which I think is amazing. Now, in the UK, we've lost around 94% of our lowland raised bogs just in historical times. So this is before we were even recording butterflies. Those bogs, probably a lot of them actually had large heath on and they're lost now. 84% of these have been lost in Scotland. But nowadays, since about the 1970s, large heath population seems stable. And that's because we don't really dig up bogs. Mostly bogs are allowed to remain intact now, and there's a lot of work restoring bogs. So that's one good thing happening for the large heath. But through our Bog Squad project, we're organizing surveys. So we're running survey days this year. We'll be running training for volunteers, showing you how to identify the large heath butterfly and asking people to get out and about around Scotland, record the butterfly and send their sightings back. Really, just so we can update our data. Because there's some sites where the butterfly probably still is there, but nobody's recorded it in 20 odd years or 30 years, and we just need to update our maps. And you can take part in our Bog Squad work parties. So this is a picture taken from Portmoak Moss in Fife. When we led a work party there, we were taking some of the regenerating birch off the bog because the birch can dry the bog out and it really shouldn't be there. And birch can be a real problem on bogs. Which leads me to my next species, which is the silvery arches moth. It's another species which is found mostly in and around peat bogs and acid grassland. And you can see it's a nice enough looking moth. It's not spectacular, but it's one which I would love to see. I've never actually seen in person, and most people don't see it because they're not trapping moths in the right places. So you'll see on the map that all the red dots show places where it's currently found. All the yellow dots show places where it was found, but hasn't been found since 1999. So we need people to look at those again, just in case this moth really is struggling. So as I mentioned, it's mostly associated with acidic soils like bogs. And the young larvae of this moth will feed upon plants like blaeberry before hibernation. So in the summertime, that's what they'll feed upon. Then they hibernate through the winter, and in springtime they come out and they feed upon a different plant. We reckon that it's actually mostly very young birches living on bogs, so kind of birch scrub living along bog edges like this, where the blaeberry also lives. Now, if you cast your mind back to what I said about Bog Squad, we have a problem because we've been working with volunteers to remove the birches from bogs. And our volunteer Lindsley is in the photograph there, and you'll see his saw that he has. He has a saw and he knows how to use it. If there's a birch on a bog, Lindsley will get it out. So we've been spending an awful lot of time doing that, but now we really need to consider our approach. How much young birch do we need to leave on bogs? So we need to find out more about it. And you might recognize the silhouette here then of Stuart Bentz, who's hosting the meeting tonight. So Stuart and I were on an expedition last year to look for the caterpillars of the species in springtime. They only feed at night, hence walking around on a peat bog at nighttime with torches. And after 3 weeks of searching, they found a single caterpillar here. And as you can see, feeding upon birch, just as we suspected. We also suspect that it might feed upon a bog myrtle, a completely different plant, but doing something similar to birches, as in growing a shrubby plant growing on a bog. So interesting times. We're trying to find out what we can, and we'll be having more searches this year. So we'd love to see you some night on a peat bog with a torch looking for caterpillars, and we'll be in touch about organizing those surveys. Sticking with moths then, so the clearwing moths, some of you might have heard of them, but really they're a mysterious little group of moths. And obviously, as you can see, they have clear wings. Most of the ones we have in Scotland actually are mimics of wasps, hornets, or bees. So just like the one you can see here, it's got the red stripes, got the yellow markings. It's trying to scare predators off, and the clear wings are part of that ruse into kind of tricking predators into thinking that it's something more dangerous than it really is. So there's 7 species of clearwing found in Scotland, and we organise surveys for 3 of them whose larvae eat the wood inside trees. So the first one you'll see at the top there is the large red-belted clearwing. It lays its eggs within freshly cut birch stumps. So you can see here the female's putting her abdomen down, laying the eggs inside. So this is what this species needs. But if you look at the map, you can see it's got a decent distribution throughout Scotland. There's no real rhyme or reason there. Birch is a fairly common plant, and we reckon that the moth is probably much more widely distributed than what we know. So we want to find out where else it is so we can protect those sites, or even just give it a clean bill of health. Maybe this moth isn't endangered and we don't need to worry about it. Then there's the Welsh clearwing. This species uses birch as well, but it lays its eggs into the bark of older birches, and you can see in the center photo the kind of the exuviae. So whenever the adult moth was coming out after remaining as a caterpillar for 2 or 3 years, living inside the wood of the tree, this is a kind of emerging and it's kind of left its shell behind itself. Again, no particular rhyme or reason for its distribution in Scotland, and of course, as its name, Welsh clearwing suggests, it is found in England and Wales, so it's not just found in Scotland. Some of its strongholds are indicated there around Loch Rannoch and Loch Tummel, but you can see also the Trossachs out. It's out on Mull as well. It's up in the Highlands. It's kind of all over the place, and we reckon old birch is probably found everywhere too. So again, this is another species we want to give a clean bill of health to. Then finally, the rarest of our clearwings is the white barred clearwing, only known from the Aberfoyle area. It feeds on, caterpillars feed upon birch and alders, but we reckon it could be in other places as well. It's a mystery why it's there, but it's turned up more than 1 year. So we reckon that there's a breeding population, and we'll be focusing our surveys this year on the Trossachs area generally, but who knows, it could be at other places as well. So it might sound tricky. You think, God, I haven't got a moth trap. How am I going to do all this work? Well, we have the answer. So this year we're going to be running workshops and distributing these pheromone lures. These are little test tubes full of chemicals that smell like the females of these species and which attract the males. All you have to do is go out at the right time of year, which is really from around the middle of June onwards for these different species, depending upon which one you're after. Put it in a little bag that kind of circulates air through, and wait for 15 minutes or so for the moths to come along. So we'll be doing a lot of that this year, and we'll be able to send more information on how to get involved in that. Hopefully it's a nice new way for people to get into mothing, even if you don't have a moth trap. And so onto our single site micros. So I'm really going to something obscure now, but hopefully you'll find it quite interesting, that there are some micro moths. Those are the tiny little moths, which are only found at single sites in Scotland or even in the UK. We'll start off with the Tyree twist. So you can see that I've included a photo there with the egg box in it. So the egg box is for scale. You can see how small it is. So Tyree twist, as you would expect, is only known from Tyree. It's thought to feed upon plants within the pea family. There were some surveys done last year by a student called Anna Aitken through the People's Trust for Endangered Species, and she found some interesting things which she's going to report back on later. And we possibly have a caterpillar of the species too. It's being raised at the moment by one of our expert caterpillar raisers who has it in the best conditions possible. And if he can raise it to an adult and confirm that it was a caterpillar of this species, then we'll finally know what the species actually feeds upon. So baby steps for some species. Then, as Stuart mentioned at the start, there's the current shoot borer, Lampronia capitella, only found, as far as we know, around Peebles, but surely it's more widespread. The caterpillars feed upon currant, currant bushes, and as you can see, they kind of flop over in springtime when they've been feeding. So we'll be organizing some special surveys for that this year, and we'd love you to get involved in those. And then silver shade, Aena argentina. In the UK, the species is only known from Glen Tilt. We don't even know what it eats and what it's doing there. So last year, a team of staff and volunteers went out. They went the whole way up Glen Tilt to the far, far reaches of it, looking for eggs, because we've seen the eggs being laid in captivity, but there were a variety of plants made available to the moths to lay their eggs upon. So we weren't sure what it would do in the wild. So we knew what the eggs looked like, but we just didn't know what the moth prefers to do when it's left up to its own devices. And after much, much searching, they found a single plant with a batch of eggs. You can see they're like little lentils laid on top of each other here. So now we know that the caterpillars eat alpine lady's mantle. So that's one clue in the conservation of this species. So we'll see where that takes us next. And some of you might have heard of the Species on the Edge project. This is a multi-agency project working all around the coasts of Scotland. It includes many different taxa. So you'll see things like natterjack toad down in Solway Coast. You'll see brown long-eared bats, great yellow bumblebees, a small tern, and a Scottish primrose, and brown bordered brown lacewing all around the coast. So that means we're working with different organizations like Bumblebee Conservation Trust, RSPB, Bug Life, Plant Life, to do this conservation work, and we're sharing the work. Sometimes we'll have Plant Life officers surveying surveying butterflies, and sometimes our butterfly conservation staff will be doing the plant surveys for them. So it's a really nice way to work. And if you live in any of the coastal areas that are mentioned here, hopefully you'll be able to get involved in it. But in Scotland, then, our priorities for Species on the Edge are, this is the marsh fritillary. It's mostly found on the west coast and some western isles of Scotland. We have some of the strongest populations in Europe because this is a species that really likes damp grassland. So all that lovely kind of Atlantic rain that keeps coming in is perfect for this species. And as you can see from the map here, it's mostly distributed in and around Mull, Islay, and Argyll and Loch Arbor, and a few other sites there too. Caterpillars of this species feed upon a plant called Devil's Bit scabious, which you can see in the photos there. But the adults fly in springtime, so they don't fly when the flower's actually out. So that's one thing that can be a bit confusing sometimes. But they lay their eggs upon the leaves of the plant, and this is another species which needs to heat itself up. So the caterpillars actually live together in a communal group inside a web. You might have seen this with the small tortoiseshell or peacock butterflies on nettles. This species does the same thing. So they make their web, and whenever they've eaten all the leaves, they can walk together and make a new web somewhere else. You can actually see the kind of trail of the web as they walk around, as they move around grasslands. So you can find these webs quite easily in the late summer, and this is one of the ways we survey for the species. Yeah, being in a web also allows to heat their bodies up and digest their food. So that's one way, another way that they kind of work together like that. Sadly, though, colonies regularly go extinct because of tiny wasps whose larvae actually eat the larvae of the marsh fritillary. And you can see in this photograph here, so these larvae are quite young. You can see them on the Devil's Bit scabious leaf. And if I zoom in, you might notice some of the tiny wasps. So there's one of them circled. You'll see another two there in the photographs. These wasps can actually have 3 generations per year, while the butterfly only has 1 generation. So really, they can cause entire colonies to basically go extinct. But that's a natural part of the life cycle of species. means then we need a network of colonies across the landscape so that they can recolonize whenever one site goes extinct because of the wasps. They can come back in and recolonize it after that. We do a lot of work with farmers and other landowners, but we really need volunteers to help as well. Volunteers are helping us with things like habitat management and taking part in surveys. And here's a photograph of one of our volunteers in late summer. This was on Mull, and she was going along finding the webs and recording the location of those. So if you live in one of these places, we'd love you to get involved in our work to help the marsh artillery out there. Staying in the west of Scotland then, we've got the transparent baronet and the slender Scotch baronet, some of the rarest moths in the UK, because these are the only places these species are found in the whole of the UK. This is a photograph I took of the transparent baronet when we went to Ulva last year. It's a small island off of Mull, and you can see how it gets its name. So like the other baronet species, it is black and red, but you can see this one has particularly transparent wings. They mostly live in very short sward, steep grasslands and very rocky places. And the slender Scotch baronet there as well. Slender Scotch baronet is only found in about 6 sites on Mull and Ulva. That's it for the entire UK. So if you happen to live out there, or if you live over in the mainland and you want to come and help us with these species, please get in touch because they're so important for our work. I'll not go into the historic climate change survivors thing, but basically there's various theories about the reasons why they might be here, but nowhere else. But if we've got time at the end, I might answer that question in the Q&A section. So these species are being threatened by things like bracken encroachment and scrub encroachment. Places like Mull, there's invasive cotoneaster. It's a garden shrub which has got out into the wild, and it's just growing over the cliffs that these species need. So at the end of April, we're going out on cotoneaster bashing days where we're cutting back the cotoneaster to help the species. But my colleague Liz out on Mull, she needs a lot of help this year with surveys for sites for transparent baronet and slender Scotch. So again, get in touch. Even if you're visiting there just as a tourist, we'd be happy to send you the sites we'd like you to visit and record these species. Oh yes, and just to mention, yes, this is the slender Scotch baronet, and these are the few remaining sites where you'll find the slender Scotch baronet. And as I mentioned earlier, we were on an expedition to to Ulva last year. We had 17 people come over. We stayed overnight in the hostel, and we all went out looking for slender Scotch and transparent baronets. Lovely days in the sunshine, going up extremely steep hills, looking for this species, and the main reason was because the map used for Ulva used to look something like this, so not a lot of detail for much of it. And we basically divided up the whole southern part of the island and walked as close as we could to every square inch of it, looking for these species. So now we know a lot more about where they are, so we can protect them. Now, back to butterflies and up to the east coast. So you might have heard of the small blue butterfly before. It's this UK's smallest butterfly species. And as you can see, my colleague Tracy's hand there, you can see it's about yeah, quite small in comparison to the size of her finger there. So one thing about the small blue though is that it isn't even very blue. It's got a few blue scales, a wee bit of blue fur, but if you see a butterfly which looks very clearly bright blue, it's not going to be the small blue because it actually looks quite dark in appearance. So the larvae of this species feed upon a plant called kidney vetch, and that means that it's mostly coastal in Scotland because kidney vetch is kind of a coastal plant or requires some disturbance from things like shingle in riverbanks. So as you can see on the map here, it goes the whole way from Eyemouth down in the borders up through Angus, little population in Glamis there. There's some in the Cairngorms, but really the strongholds are in and around the Murray coast. And I know that there are some Scottish Wildlife Trust reserves up there, and we're doing some work with the rangers on those to get the reserves in good condition, but also get the species monitored at those sites. And yes, the whole way up to the Caithness coast up there at Thurso. So if you live in any of those places and want to get involved in small blue work, my colleague Tracy is the most enthusiastic person I've ever met around butterflies. She's just amazing. She runs so much work for this species and she's a real credit to butterfly conservation. She really wants volunteers to help get out and record the small blue, to look for them at different sites around Murray and Angus in particular, but also to take part in her work parties. And I've heard her work parties are the most fun. So maybe start the day with not a lot of fun. You're cutting gorse, you're kind of doing a lot of kind of grunt work, but really to help the short grasslands that this species needs. But there's always lots of laughs, I've heard, and even some bonfires, swimming in the sea. And at the end of the day, you get to warm your feet by a lovely bonfire with good crack and good fun and good people. So hopefully, if you live on the east coast of Scotland and want to get involved in that, Tracy's your person, and I can put you in touch with her. Sticking with the coast, especially the east coast, this is the Portland moth, a species I've never seen, despite my best efforts. So you can see on the map here that this moth was mostly coastal in Scotland now. All of the yellow dots show places where it's been found since 1999. All of the blue dots show places where it was found before, but hasn't been seen since before 1999. So you can see we reckon it's possibly extinct on the west coast of Scotland, but it is also an immigrant species, so they could possibly we could possibly recolonize these from immigrant ones flying in. But yes, mostly coastal, or you'll find it in some river shingle across along the River Spey. And some of the best sites for it are places like here down in Tentsmuir, are also up on the kind of Murray coast in and around Colbin and Findhorn and places like that. So this species flies in August, as I mentioned, no longer really on the west coast. The caterpillars feed upon creeping willow and other sand dune plants, so probably starts off small and goes to the creeping willow. But that's not the end of the story. The larvae actually need the sand underneath the plants. They burrow into the sand during the day and come out at night time to feed, and they actually make their chrysalis within the sand as well. So if there's no sand, but there's creeping willow, this species can't exist. And on the riverbanks, it's probably just burrowing into the sand as well when you find it along the spey. So creeping willow needs to have bare sand around it, but we reckon that a lot of our sand dunes are becoming really stable places. This is a photograph I took of Tentsmuir last November, and as you can see, it's basically parts of it have turned into a Christmas tree farm. All these lovely little pine trees have seeded themselves from the big pines nearby. So a lot of our dunes are kind of becoming really stable places. They still have sand dune plants, they still have the creeping willow, but the bare sand is disappearing in many places. So we're working with landowners like Nature Scot and Forestry and Land Scotland at Hansmere to remove some of the pine trees and get a bit more disturbance in the dunes to bring that sand back, which will help the Portland moth and the grayling butterfly there. But really what I'm asking people to do is, if you're a moth trapper, we really need you to get out to the coasts this August and do your best at trapping for Portland moth, and see what you can find, because it could be in places, especially along the west coast, which we just haven't searched in quite a while. So it'd be amazing if somebody can find it on the west coast of Scotland. There's your challenge for tonight. And now just going a wee bit further inland, I just want to introduce one of the last major species tonight. It's the Kentish glory moth. So still glorious, as you can see here, beautiful moth, but no longer found in Kent. Its entire UK distribution is now in Scotland, mostly in and around the Cairngorms, some in Aberdeenshire, Colbin Forest near Inverness, and some in Perthshire as well, in and around Loch Rannoch. So this is a beautiful moth, one of my favourite species. They're quite large and really colourful, and a joy to see. So the moths are found in open birch woodland, and like the silvery arches which we met earlier, the caterpillars of this species will only eat young birch. So it's a problem because young birch soon becomes old birch. So it's one of these issues where we need to have a constant supply of young birch coming through to help the species. It does really well in forestry way leaves because they're constantly cutting the birch down every 5 or 6 years to keep the way leaves open, and that is perfect for the moth, interestingly enough. So they'll be on the wing soon. So they'll be flying from mid-April to mid-May. And again, we have our trusty pheromone lures. So hot off the press, we've got a supply of pheromone lures for Kentish Glory for this year. They're hopefully going to be made up over Easter. So fingers crossed that we'll have them for the flight season this year after not having any for the past few years. Again, all you have to do is open the bottle of lure and you'll see the males flying at you from a great distance to come along, and they think they'll find a female, but they'll just find you waiting to record them. So if you're in that area, or if you're planning to visit that area during this time, we'd love you to take part in some Kentish glory moth kind of sightings. So I'm coming towards the end of my talk, but I kind of feel sad that I haven't got to mention every species. So I've not talked about the checkered skipper butterfly, found only in around 25 kilometers from around Fort William, and that's about it for the entire UK. I haven't mentioned the scarce crimson and gold moth, possibly the Ayrshire coast. It hasn't been seen in about 20 years at all in Scotland, but it was last seen near Prestwick Airport. It could still be there. We need somebody to go out and have a look. Or the white spotted sable moth found around Argyll and Locharbor. Caterpillars feed upon goldenrod. Very distinctive species. If you're good with the camera, get out and snap species like this. But again, we're organizing surveys for most of these species this year, so hopefully you'll get involved in those. And many others besides all these. So how can you help? Surveys of monitoring. I've talked about monitoring and surveys all night. You don't have to come out on a ball with me nighttime. Not if you don't want to. You can just record the webs of Marsh Artillery if you're out in the west of Scotland, or your northern brown arguses if you live in Edinburgh or any of those coastal places. So there's almost something for almost everybody in Scotland somewhere. Or you can take part in habitat maintenance like scrub removal, bog restoration, wildflower growing and planting. Again, something for everyone. I'm not going to list all of these events. I'll send them around after today, but I'll also put into the chat a link to our events page. But if you go to butterfly-conservation.org/Scotland, you'll see all our stuff there, including our events. But some of those which I might draw your attention to are things like our Bog Squad work parties coming up next week. And this week, I'm going to be out in Appin on the 9th of March. That's this Saturday to do some work there for Marsh Artillery. And there's some Cotoneaster work in Mull on the 26th and 27th of April. But yeah, I'll send all these out to you or put them in the chat. So thank you very much. You can see my email address on the screen there. I'll put it in the chat too, but feel free to take a photo of my email address so you can get in contact with me after today if any of these kind of opportunities have been of interest to you at all. Thanks a lot. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Anthony. That was absolutely fantastic. There's just so much. There's just so much out there for butterflies and moths. And it's just amazing that we see so much being done with them. I mean, I remember first being introduced to Kentish Glory about oh, it must be over 10 years ago, and somebody putting up a map similar to what you did there. And I think there was 3 points on the map, 3 rough areas. And it was very rough areas, and it was kind of like, well, they're in there. We think we haven't seen them for a while, and then I was lucky enough, as you know, to be involved in some of the pheromone surveying, and you know, see that map now from all the volunteers that got involved in the surveying. There's now lots of new places like kind of Lochranach, Tummel area where it's, you know, appeared on the map, but also there's not just big, it's in here somewhere. There's records all up and down over massive extents, and that's just total transformation by volunteers and change the species. So I really do encourage anybody that's listening, and you know, if you want to get involved in these things, please do. You can make a massive difference. You work with a really good team of people and other volunteers, and wow, the difference in the real-time conservation you can be involved in. The great thing with this priority species lists is that, you know, it's been worked up with, you know, proper full scientific advice and information, and Anthony's covered that showing these are the priority species that need help right now, and this is how we're going to do it. There is a plan to get it in, and I think that's just amazing. And yeah, it's something that really excites me. And yeah, going out bogs in the middle of the night with a torch. I know if this sounds
good fun.
weird, but it was fantastic. It was fantastic fun. And we saw a whole range of species. And there are a lot of caterpillars and nocturnal by night. So there's stuff that I have seen that's sort of sleepy by day, but not very active. No, they were up and they were feeding and everything. So you see a whole other little world by night. So I encourage folk to go out. One of the bogs that was used for that is Westernmoss near Stirling. So yeah, definitely, people, please keep an eye on this. the butterfly conservation event page is probably the best place, Anthony, to see all the
Yeah,
events going
if
on.
they go to the /Scotland address there, but I'll also stick my email and that address into the chat so anybody can copy it. Or I know you were told at the start of the talk not to click any links, but I promise I'm not going to send anybody to any dodgy websites. So I'll put my email address in there so anybody who wants can copy it. But
So
her,
if you see any links in the chat that are from Anthony, the arrow key. Please,
yeah, they're legit.
please do feel free to use them. And if you don't pick up any of the details just now at the top, please do get in touch with us, and we'll make sure to get them passed on to you as well. But there is an amazing amount going on in butterfly conservation. It's amazing that surveys, from surveys to work parties year round, it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So please do have a look. I have got a wee list of questions, but it's growing
Yeah.
rapidly in front of me at my side.
Yeah.
Uh,
Should we do a rapid fire question round then? Let's answer them as quick as we can.
yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. So the first one is I'm going to change it slightly because I'll say what the original is, but it's where can I find planting advice for garden plants and hedgerows
Yeah.
for my area for Clakmannanshire and West Fife? So
Okay. So one of the things
there's
we have on our website is a guide. So I used to work doing the urban work you mentioned. So we've got a wild spaces project. So I've got the booklet here. So it's on our website. You can download it under, you probably won't be able to see that, but all the advice, it's blurred out there. But anyway, all the advice is there. So if they get in touch, we can send them a copy of the booklet, or they can download it as well. But yeah, it's called Wild Spaces and it's got all the planting advice.
Is there any way? I think part of that question, a few other similar ones, is how also can folk target it to match their local area? How they best pick the things that are going to work best
Yeah.
for their area?
But yeah, well, what I've tended to do is when I was writing that guide, the Wild Spaces guide, was I just made it as certain things you can help by planting certain plants. So basically, um, you're not going to help every single species of moth in Scotland, but there's certain things, there's certain facts here, like we've got advice on trees to plant. So it says if you plant silver birch or downy birch, you can help the large emerald moth plus 130 other moth species. So it's kind of got again that won't show up at all. No, it's not going to work. Um, basically, we've got the best plants to plant and how many species of different moths you can help with that. And yeah, there's things like the websites which show you which moths are found nearby. So that's probably the best thing to go to.
And if you've got a room for a native tree, that sounds
Yeah.
that figure that sounds like one of the best things you can do. Lots
Yep.
of caterpillar food plant
Yep.
in there as well. Um, so another question we have here is, so the question is, lots of trees are being planted across the country. Um, is that good news for butterflies and moths? And are they considered with such projects? And also, if when they're clearing and cutting trees, are butterflies and moths considered? So I think there's kind of two halves really to
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Are
Interesting
they
one. Yep.
considered when trees are put in, and also when they're taken
Yep.
away?
Yeah, so first part of the question, yes, they are often considered when there's new major tree planting projects. So if it's something like a forestry project, then they generally do. We've got like basically like a register that whenever there's a project that comes up where one of our priority species lives, then we kind of get a notification based on that. So that's something that's really useful, because yeah, you could just easily lose colonies of things like northern brown Argus just by accident. You could move the forestry one bit over and it would not have harmed it. For clearfell, most of the woodland which is taken out is non-native kind of spruces and conifers and things like that. We're doing some research which is being presented at our next conference. We're kind of sponsoring the research on the impact of clearfell, what happens whenever there's regeneration, whenever all the trees are felled, what species come into it, and it's really interesting. Silvery arches, one of the species we mentioned as one of our priority species, has actually been found doing really well at clearfell sites in Perthshire. No one knew until somebody surveyed it this year. So there might be some opportunities there for natural regeneration whenever trees are felled.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. It's kind of right trees in the right place, and
Yep.
yeah,
And actually, yeah, I suppose I would just say as well, if it's native broadleaf planting, that is amazing for moths. Most of our, I think I can't say for sure, but a huge number of our moths just eat trees. Sorry, excuse me. Their caterpillars just eat trees. So actually woodland planting will help them a lot. But so long as they're in the right place, that's an important thing.
yeah, if you run a moth trap in a birch or an old oak woodland, you get amazing things appearing in all sorts of numbers as well, huge
Mm.
numbers.
Yep.
So I'm just trying to keep up with it. There's more questions coming in, so I'm trying to keep up with them at my side here on another screen. So if I keep looking away, that's where I'm looking. So what I picked out there is how widespread is purple hair streak in Scotland?
Oh,
Um, and the
yeah.
person says they see them in Blair Gowrie,
Yep.
but they say they're not common there.
Yep. A lot, they're a lot more widespread than we thought. And actually, a lot of it's down to the efforts of a few volunteers. I don't know if Chris Stamp is here tonight, but one of our volunteers, Chris Stamp, made it his mission, I think, during the kind of COVID years to get people to go out and look for purple hair streaks. And they've turned up everywhere, especially in the borders where people thought they weren't really found at all. So purple hair streaks are a species which mostly feed upon, their caterpillars feed upon mature oak trees. So it's difficult to find them because you have to be out in the evening to look for these tiny purple butterflies flying at the top of oak trees. But there's other ways to survey them using, you can find their eggs whenever the trees fall down in the winter and things like that. So yeah, they're actually in a lot more places than we thought, but still not a common species, but probably more widespread than we reckoned before, which is a nice thing to see that the purple hair streak isn't just hanging on.
And it's actually for those in the Stirling area,
Mm,
Stirling University, really
yep.
good place to see them. Dunblane Golf Course actually is quite good in the walk that goes towards Kipperake Glen. If
Yep,
those
which is
local that know
Crag
it,
and
if
all that,
they
all the hill foots, wherever you get kind of mature oak trees along the hill foots, yeah, good chance of getting
they
in there.
they're there. So if you happen to be out in the late summer and it's a relatively good day, especially if it's a good evening, it's worth having
Mm,
a 10-15 minute look up at an oak tree, and you never know. They're amazing butterfly, amazing purple
yeah, love it.
butterfly, and when you first see them, it's like you can't believe you've never seen them before, and then you start seeing them everywhere, especially in a good year, and you think, how
Yeah,
did I miss them? But of course,
yeah,
they're always up the top of the trees, and I think there's some amazing pictures Chris Stamp put of some of with oak twigs that fallen in some of the recent bad
yeah,
weather and finding the wee eggs. So if you're walking under an oak tree that's dropped lots of bits and pieces of branches, have a wee look for this wee white spiky egg. And it takes a while to get your eye in, fair enough, but when you see it, you will start to spot them.
yeah,
It's a wee bit
you're
of
right.
standing examining twigs, but worth a look.
Mhm.
Um, so, got another question: is how is there survey and volunteer opportunities in the Edinburgh area? Especially asking, is there survey activities and things you can do in your garden? So we can probably
Yep.
widen that as well as the Edinburgh area, which I'm sure there will be stuff. But also, how do you find these for your local area? How do you find those opportunities?
Yeah, so probably the best thing to do would be to get in touch with me after today because we've got so much you can do in your garden. So, for example, there's the garden butterfly survey. All you need to do is count the butterflies in your garden once per month, report the numbers back to us. That's a really simple thing to do. We've got some rare species in Edinburgh, including the grayling butterfly and the northern brown argus. They need people to count them and they need people to do some work to help them. So there's some things to do like that. And we've also got a really active kind of volunteer group starting there with people leading guided walks and things. So I can put you in touch with them and they can take you out to show you what butterflies to see about the place. So again, get in touch and I can point you in the right direction after this. There's some volunteer opportunities listed on our website, but I always think the best thing to do is speak to a person who's working in the area. So contact me and I'll get you to the right person.
Yeah, yeah, I get it's really there's so much going on. There's those public
Yeah.
events, but also if you know what's you've got so many other projects going on. If you know somebody's interests and where they are and the sort of thing they like doing, you can almost tailor to them
Yep.
what
We
they
can.
might be particularly interested in doing. So
Yep.
do definitely get in touch with Anthony, and obviously Anthony's backed by other staff in the Scotland team and also a team of other volunteers who help coordinate things. So there's lots of people you can be put in touch with to so don't worry if you don't know much about butterflies and moths, please
Yeah.
also get in touch because yeah, it's everybody's welcome and friendly and just wants more people to help. So do please get in touch. So somebody has asked as well, is there any way you can put in your postcode or find what you can look for in your area with butterflies and moths?
The best way to do that is actually our app. So if you go onto the Play Store, so Google Play Store or Apple Store, there's a free app called I Record Butterflies. So the first part is I record, just one word. I'll put it into the chat here. I record butterflies. So we've altered that app to allow people to basically, it'll show you the butterflies in your area at that time of year. So it tells you probably within the next, 50 miles or so. So not right on your doorstep, but really, yeah, it tells you what butterflies to expect to see when you're out and about. We've also got regional guides for every part of Scotland. So there's like there's a Edinburgh and Lothian's guide for butterflies and moths. It will tell you what species to expect in that area. And I've just realized all the messages I've sent have only gone to the other panelists, the people hosting tonight. So I'm gonna put write my email in properly so everyone can see it. Somebody just made a note there that that's the case. So
I think we can get it
there's
sent around everybody as well afterwards, so we can get all this information passed around
that's it
everyone.
now. Yeah, I think Guy has put into the chat there. Yeah, so yeah, just to say on our website, yeah, you've got all those regional guides. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's and it's even worthwhile as you demonstrated with the pair fertility. If you happen to be passing a bit of habitat that looks good for one of these species Anthony's mentioned, and it's not known in your area, well, it's worth having a look. You never know what you might stumble across. Yeah, I think I'm right in saying the white barred clearwing was found in Aberfoyle by somebody who'd seen clearwings in Springwatch. Thought, oh, that's one of those clearwing things. Took a picture, tagged butterfly conservation on Twitter, and it was kind of knowing that there's some other clearwings, and it was kind of I'll be Welsh or I'll be one of the ones we know. But then it's said complete shockwaves through the whole kind of conservation community because actually it's a really rare species in England, never recorded before in Scotland. So you never know what you might find. So it's always worth if you pass something you think it's good for that species that's mentioned in the talk. It's always you never know what you might come across. And actually,
I discovered pearl border fritillaries here. The first one that I knew of in Glen Lyon. So I'm in Glen Lyon and near Aberfeldy tonight. I discovered populations here when I was out cycling one morning, and I was like, what the hell? And it was just there. I was just cycling along the road during lockdown, and the species was there. So yeah, they can be in places we don't realize until you kind of have your eyes open to them.
It is for me. It's one of the things that, if you run a moth trap, that's something else I really encourage folk to get into, and you can do cheaper and self-made kind of moth trap setups, and you can help record butterflies and moths by putting your records in. Your Vice County recorders can help you get them identified and everything else. And it's kind of like Christmas morning. Every time you open the trap, I've got mine on tonight, and you never know what's going to be in there. You might have something new to your area, or it happens. It really does happen. So it's really exciting. And actually, the next question is kind of on that line, and somebody's saying, I had a holly blue for the first time ever in Aberdeen last year in the garden.
Oh,
And
I
they're
wonder if it was
saying,
that person. Yeah, I'd heard they got to Aberdeen. I wonder if it was you who'd sent the record in, because they jumped 50 miles or something, I think, from the nearest known site below that. I don't know where the nearest one was, but
so I think the message for that person is if you have sent the record in, fantastic on you because you made a bit of butterfly history because it's been going round to the kind of butterfly community saying, oh wow, it was recorded for the first time, what a massive jump. If you haven't recorded it yet, please do put in that record because you'll be one of only a couple that has come in. So
and I would say the best way to do that, Stuart, as well, if anybody wants to know, is we always recommend people use the iRecord app if you can, or the iRecord Butterflies app. iRecord lets you attach a photo with it, which is really good. So the verifier, the person checking it, can see which species it is. Some people use a iNaturalist, but we prefer iRecord. It gives us better data. So if anybody's not using that yet, we always recommend people do that. Or on our website, there's kind of contact butterfly recording contacts. So it will tell you who to email it to.
Yeah, and I guess it maybe takes a little bit of time to get used to iRecord, but you see, after you've put in a few records,
Yeah.
it's just so easy, and you can just have it on your phone, and when you're walking around, you see, and the thing is, you can do more than just butterflies and moths. If you see something and know what it is, you can just take that record and literally, in a few click here, click there, and you're waiting at the train station or something, you can just quickly put in the record. And you might think, well, casual records, that do they mean that much? But they go into that huge national data set, and that's where they really become something, and they can really be analysed. So it is worth it. Just putting these records whenever you come across them. And it's not the first time where somebody has been in one bit of Scotland and they've said something like the Holly Blue or something. I see it all the time, but they're actually on holiday in Aberdeen or something. And well, actually, it's not been
Yeah.
recorded there, and you end up finding something really unusual. So, part of that same question is, is there a bit of a trend going on where things are moving up the East Coast? Was that just a one-off, or is this something that we're seeing both for Holly Blue and others? Are we
Mm.
seeing lots of things
Seems
come up?
seems yeah, it seems to be a climate related trend. We probably need a few more years worth of data just to see that it is a trend and not just a one-off. But just the fact that species like the wall brown, for example, and small skipper have just increased year on year, going north every single year for probably the last 10 years at least. I think, shows that it's a climate change thing. Holly Blue has probably also benefited from the fact that it's escaped its parasites. So it's very well known for Holly Blue that they are parasitized by these little wasps, which come for them and can wipe out their populations. But it might be that they have gone so far beyond the range of the wasps so quickly that the wasps can't keep up with them, and therefore they might have escaped them for now until the wasp population catches up with them. But it's up for debate. Nobody knows for sure.
Yeah, it's just amazing of that whole balance going on. It's all happening in front of us, and
Mm,
yeah, you can be part of it by doing the recording and part of the research. Just as much as any scientist analysing the data or whatnot, you can
yep.
be just as equal part of that and the conservation that goes with it. So there is a question there about somebody who said they're keen to get involved, but they know with birds and bird recording, they encourage people not to lure or attract because it's going
Yep.
to disturb them and disturb their natural pattern. So is there concerns with that, with moths depleting their energy? And I guess that probably covers
Mhm.
both things like luring, but also moth trapping, etc. as well. So is
Yep.
there
Yep.
concerns there?
Yeah, and yeah, you're quite right to raise those concerns. So we'd always recommend. That's why we provide the training for those. We don't just send somebody the lure in the post and say on you go. We provide training on how to use those, not to stay in the same place too long, or if you have found them in a place, maybe drive another 5 miles or so and try somewhere else to try like a different area, because then you won't get the same ones flying 5 miles to get to the same place. And that's also why we recommend you don't leave the lures out for like longer than 10-15 minutes, because the moths could fly a great distance to get to you away from where they should be, looking for the females that are nearby to them. And also we try to coordinate things. So Stuart, if you said you were going to do your luring in and around kind of Kincardine or somewhere like that, or Stirling, then I probably wouldn't do it there. I'd pick somewhere else nearby so that we weren't overlapping too much.
Yeah, so I think that's the key thing. Is it's that it's that sensible use, isn't it? For one, I guess if we put out a lure and we leave it for 2 hours and something
Mhm.
turns up, but we now don't know if it's come from that area or 5 kilometers away and it's somehow
Yep.
sensed it and come, so it becomes less useful. So it's about getting the balance, and even
Yep.
when you moth trap, trying to keep the moth's disturbance to the minimum.
Yep.
Make sure you put them back out, make sure you release them in a place where they're nice and cool and stuff during the day and they're not going to get disturbed or predated. But the key thing is if you're doing that and recording, you kind of have to do the two, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you may be causing a little bit of disturbance, but it's providing that key information that's leading to the conservation, that's allowing Anthony and colleagues to be able to analyse that. Things like the clear wings, we just know so little about them in Scotland. We've actually, it's drastically been revised. The flight times are known for them in Scotland in the last couple of years from surveys. So if you imagine people trying to give out advice, things like some of the forestry advice we had questions on later, if we don't have that information, we can't give it, and we might lose the species. So there might be a little bit of disturbance, but it's that balance of, yes, a little bit of disturbance, but getting that key information to conserve it. but if
Yeah.
it's already something that we know is in that area, I guess we don't want people really twitching it as such, and 50 different people going to
Yeah,
record
it doesn't
something.
add a lot to it. Yeah, unless you're running like a training event to show people, but otherwise it doesn't add a lot to the knowledge. So we're trying to expand what we know by going into new places. So that's kind of the spirit of the thing.
So I think that's probably another key thing actually. If you really want to see particular species, keep an eye, especially these rare species, keep an eye out for events, things going on with butterfly conservation. Contact Anthony and see what's going on and who's doing surveys. And then you can come to the training events and see them, and then hopefully you can maybe go away to one new place from that as well, and maybe pick up something new. But if you're really just keen to see it to begin with, please go to one of the organised events, and then usually there's a higher chance you're going to get to see it as well,
Yeah.
by going to one of them. So there's a few quick questions because we're just about to run out of time,
Yeah.
but a few other quick ones. One is any butterfly or moth species protected?
Yes, a checkered skipper. At one stage, people were collecting checkered skippers, so there's certain regulations around that, and I think marsh artillery has special protection as well, but not the way that certain birds and bats and things have protection. Habitat for marsh artillery is destroyed all the time. When there's nothing, sometimes it can be there's housing developments and things proposed in and around Oban on marsh artillery habitat, so it's not protected the way that certain other species might be.
Yeah,
And
it's a shame when we consider how rare some of these are.
yeah,
So there's somebody asking about particular areas, but again, I guess I'll broaden it out. But how to choose wildflowers? They've got an area of land and they're trying to make it better for butterflies and
yep.
moths, and they're keen to do a lot of wildflowers and wildflower meadows. So how do you go about picking species, and I guess
Yeah.
making sure they're suitable for your location as well?
Yeah, it's hard to go wrong with the Scotia Seeds website. I'm not getting paid by them, but they're the best in Scotland. I think probably the only supplier of local Providence seeds in Scotland. They'll actually tell you where they're from. They'll provide you some information on what your soil type is. You tell them what your soil type is, they'll recommend a mix. All their mixes come with about 30 odd different species of plant in it, including grasses, which many butterflies use for their caterpillars, and your wildflowers too. So it's a company called Scotia Seeds, and they're the company we use for buying for restoration projects.
Yeah, they have some fantastic mixes, and that reminds me because you've done some fantastic projects using yellow rattle to try and
Mm.
bring grassland areas back to having a diversity of wildflowers. So maybe I just ask you quickly about that and how you do that and how you use yellow rattle to kind of do
Yep.
that.
Yep. So yellow rattle is a hemiparasite, which means it gets its roots into grasses and other plants nearby and weakens them. So it means that whenever you're making a meadow, it can be useful to sow yellow rattle because it allows the little wildflowers to grow while the grasses are being held back. Best time to sow it though is not now. Best time to sow it's autumn. So at the end of summer, it makes its seeds. You can collect the seeds yourself. One of the best ways to collect the seeds, if you know of a source of yellow rattle, is just to get a butterfly net or similar and just sweep it through and collect the seeds up. And then you can store the seeds. But the important thing is that it requires a cold snap through the winter to germinate. So you can't sow it in springtime unless you have kept it in the fridge or the freezer through the winter to give it that cold snap that it needs to get started up.
It's quite well, but it's amazing how much, especially if you got, you showed some great pictures at the top where it was very amenity grassland, really hardy
Mm,
grasses, and just with the yellow rattle coming in and parasitising them, it really knocked them down.
it's
And
about, yeah.
even before you'd got in and planted plug plants and things, lots of things had naturally just went, oh, no more competition.
Yep.
Outcome.
Yep.
So amazing technique. So a couple more quick ones. I'll try to finish for 9, but a couple more quick questions. One is, when did Kentish chloride disappear from England?
Well, there's some people who believe that it might still be down there. I'm not one of those people. I think some people, one of the branches in the Midlands, are clutching at straws, thinking it still could still be there. I can't remember when it went extinct. I think it was. I can't. It's not within recent historical time at all. It's not within the 70s or 80s. I think it was well before that. Um, So and there's a possible reintroduction project. So some people want to reintroduce the Kentish glory to the West Midlands. So they're devoting a lot of time to it. So yeah, I hope it works.
Yeah. So another quick one is, are cinnabar moths in decline in Scotland? Somebody's saying I had them in the garden a few years ago, but none in the last few years. And they said they do have ragwort
Yeah.
in my garden. So
I was going to say, yeah, so cinnabar is black and red. It's warning predators that it's full of poisons because it feeds upon ragwort, which is known as a poisonous plant. It absorbs all those poisons and uses them to poison predators. Um, I would just say, yeah, keep it. I mean, if you've got a crop of ragwort in your garden, then like you're better than I am. I don't grow ragwort in my garden, but I do let it grow around the place. Um, but it is the main caterpillar food plant. It's all they'll feed upon. I think ragwort is I want to say it might be a biennial plant, so it can die off if you don't keep disturbing the soil and letting the seeds get back in. Oh, there's somebody, Mark Tasker there has actually, oh, Mark, great author actually, so he knows for sure. Kentish glory was last seen in the Wire Forest in the 1970s, so I was wrong there, so I stand corrected. And hopefully it gets reintroduced down there. I know they're putting a lot of effort into that. Sorry, what was my trail again?
cinnabars and
Cinnabar. Yeah, I
yeah.
think cinnabar, ragwort, I think is a short-lived perennial, maybe a biennial plant, so you need to keep sowing it or making the ground bare so it can seed itself back into the ground.
So I've got two last ones. One's a quick one, and it's are box moths spreading in Scotland? Somebody's saying
Yeah, seem to be.
I'm like, anxious to buy more box plants because we experienced them in the south of England.
Yeah. But we're getting more records for sure. I know some people who are doing moth trapping events and we're getting box moths in them. In I've never seen them in a trap I've ran, but I've seen them in other people's traps in Scotland. So there's no reason why they won't spread because they've spread throughout the rest of the UK. So I don't know where the latest record. Actually, the latest I think Helen had one in Aberdeen this year. So or Aberdeenshire. So they've got up there.
They are
But
coming
actually,
in.
Mark's up that way. Mark Tasker might know. Arrived at Yep, Mark arrived Aberdeen 2023. So thank you, Mark, for that confirmation.
So they are, yeah, they are. I guess it's not surprising with the amount of plants that are moved around and stuff. It's probably not surprising. They've probably had lots of little bits of help as well as natural spread.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So my
last,
advice is don't plant box anymore. Use a native plant instead of box. Or no, some box is native, but that box which is used in gardens isn't really native. So use something else, which is better.
yeah, there's lots of lovely native hedgerow plants. Definitely, if you can use some of them, absolutely brilliant, and you'll get lots of different species of moth, and they usually won't do what the box moth does and decimate your entire plant. So you might get wee
Yeah,
caterpillar nibbles, but you won't lose the whole thing, and you'll get a whole variety of moths and other
yeah.
pollinators and everything as well. So, the very last question is: where's the best place to record butterflies and moths? I think the record of this is basically habitats to go to. Is there any particular nice habitats to go
Yep.
to record them? I think actually meant by both if you have a moth trap, but also if you just
Mm,
happen to be going somewhere and walking about by day.
yeah. If you've got a moth trap anywhere, I always try to recommend have varied habitats. So when I was doing trapping at Tentsmuir last year, I found moths on the dunes, but I found a whole lot more moths in a meadow which was surrounded by trees. I think there was 5 or 6 different species of tree around. There's willow, birch, hazel, kind of the holy trinity of trees for that moths feed upon. And I got huge numbers and a wide variety. So I always try to say, like, have a nice grassland with some trees nearby, and then you're getting a really good mix of different species. Um, that's probably the best way.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, as you try different places, I get you see different things and different times of year. It's amazing. I mean, even just now, you get. I think I've had 7, 8 species in the garden already this year, and yeah, it's me. Even December and things, you can pick up species in a good warm night. So yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to get into, and I still get. I think it's about 10 years I've ran a trap, but I still regularly get surprises. They look at the trap and
Me
go,
too.
oh, either because I haven't seen it for ages. I've just never. I've had a new for me this year already, a
Oh, you
dark
have?
chestnut moth.
Oh,
And I've
fantastic.
not
Very
had
nice.
that before. That was brand new to me, so it's amazing. There's always so much more. So definitely encourage everybody to get involved. But
Mm.
yeah, I think that's how we're just. I think
Yes.
we've just managed the questions. We're just sort of out of time. Thank you to everybody for coming along, but thank you to Anthony for doing an amazing talk
You're very
and
welcome.
showing us amazing work with all those amazing photographs as well. I did come into, I had a wee internet problem at one point and it chucked me off. I think it was just as you were talking about Northern Brown Argus, and I came back in. The first thing I came back in was loads of clapping hands and love hearts and things appearing at the bottom of the screen. So nice to see how, as you were talking about Northern Brown Argus, people were obviously really excited and really,
Yeah.
really keen to know about it and get involved. So please do get involved. There's amazing stuff out there. As Anthony said, lots of opportunity. Please contact Anthony and colleagues and find out what's out there and what's in your area, because there is lots going on. And yeah, no, thank you again very much, Anthony, and thank you to the various of the SWD committee who are in the background as well, helping to do your questions and bring the questions to my attention, etc., because it is definitely much a team effort
Yeah.
in doing these talks. So thank you very much again, everybody, and thank you very much, Anthony.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.